The dust of the Arizona Territory settles on everything, including secrets. For 19-year-old Clara May Thompson, it was the price of her father's sins, a bill paid with her own future. She was sold like cattle to a man she'd never met, Silas Blackwood, the formidable owner of the sprawling Blackwood Ranch. The stagecoach left her on his doorstep with nothing but a tattered valise and a heart full of dread. But when the imposing rancher opened his door and his eyes fell upon her, the look on his face wasn't one of a man meeting his new bride. It was the chilling recognition of a ghost from a past he'd killed a man to bury. The journey had leached the color from Clara May Thompson's world. For 3 weeks, the landscape outside the stagecoach window had been a monotonous blur of ochre sage and a sky so vast and empty it felt like a judgment. She had left St. Louis in disgrace, though the disgrace was not her own. It belonged to her father, a man whose love for whiskey and cards had finally exceeded his love for his only daughter. The debt was to a man whose name was only spoken in whispers, a Mr. Kane, and the payment, it turned out, was her. She was chattel, a mail-order bride without the pretense of correspondence or choice. Her destination was Redemption Gulch, Arizona Territory, and her new owner was a rancher named Silas Blackwood. Her father had wept as he'd put her on the coach, his tears smelling of cheap gin and regret. "He's a wealthy man, Clara May," he'd slurred, pressing a few crumpled dollars into her hand. "You'll be safe. You'll have a good life." Clara knew better. Safety was a luxury, and a good life was a fairy tale told to children. She was 19, with hands softened by mending her father's shirts, not by tilling unforgiving soil. She clutched the small worn Bible on her lap, its leather cover the only familiar comfort in a world that had suddenly become hostile and strange. Inside a pressed wildflower from her mother's grave was all she had left of the person who had truly loved her. The stagecoach lurched to a halt, kicking up a cloud of fine red dust that stung her eyes and coated her tongue. "Redemption Gulch!" The driver bellowed, his voice raspy from the road. "End of the line for you, miss." Clara stepped down, her legs unsteady. The town was little more than a single dusty street, flanked by raw, unpainted wooden buildings, a saloon with swinging doors from which loud tinny piano music spilled, a general store, a blacksmith's forge ringing with the rhythmic clang of a hammer, and a handful of other nondescript structures. Men stopped and stared, their eyes hard and sun-squinted, raked over her with a mixture of curiosity and appraisal that made her skin crawl. She pulled her shawl tighter, her gaze fixed on the ground. A man was waiting for her, leaning against a sturdy buckboard wagon, hitched to 2 powerful-looking horses. He was not the driver. He was broad-shouldered and dressed in practical dusty ranch clothes, denim trousers, a worn cotton shirt and scuffed leather boots. He pushed his hat back, revealing a face that looked as though it had been carved from the unforgiving land itself. "Miss Thompson?" he asked. His voice was a low rumble devoid of warmth. Clara nodded, unable to find her own voice. "I'm Jesse Foreman for the Blackwood Ranch. Mr. Blackwood sent me to fetch you." He didn't offer to take her bag, just gestured with his head toward the wagon. "It's a long ride. Best we get started before sundown." The silence on the ride out to the ranch was as vast and oppressive as the landscape. Jesse offered no conversation, and Clara was too intimidated to ask questions. What could she ask? Is my new husband a cruel man? Did he pay a fair price for me? Will he beat me? The questions were terrifying, and she feared the answers even more. They traveled for what felt like hours, deeper and deeper, into a wilderness of towering saguaros that stood like silent sentinels and jagged sun-scorched mesas that burned crimson in the declining light. Finally, Jesse pointed. There she is, the Blackwood place. It wasn't a humble homestead. It was an empire of dust and cattle, a large two-story ranch house built of sturdy timber and stone stood proudly against the backdrop of a dramatic, purple-tinged mountain range. It was surrounded by a network of barns, corrals, and outbuildings. Men on horseback moved with purpose their calls to the cattle carrying on the dry evening air. It was clear that Silas Blackwood was not just a wealthy man. He was a powerful one. Clara's heart sank. A powerful man had powerful appetites, and very little patience for those who displeased him. Jessie pulled the buckboard to a stop before the main house's wide veranda. He's inside, waiting. Every step she took toward that door felt like a step toward a hangman's noose. Her hand trembled as she reached for the heavy iron knocker. Before her knuckles could touch the wood, the door swung open. The man who stood before her was an imposing figure, tall and broad, with a presence that seemed to fill the entire doorway. His hair was as black as a raven's wing, streaked with a touch of silver at the temples, and his eyes were a startling, piercing blue. They were the color of a winter sky, and just as cold. His face was stark, handsome, in a severe way, with a square jaw shadowed by dark stubble. He wore a clean, dark shirt, and trousers simple but of good quality. This was Silas Blackwood. This was the man who owned her. He looked her over his gaze, clinical, unreadable. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She tried to curtsy, to say something, anything but fear had stolen her words. She could only stand there, a lone, pathetic figure on his doorstep. And then something in his expression shifted. The cold, detached appraisal vanished, replaced by a flicker of something she couldn't name. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly. His face, which had been a mask of stone, suddenly lost its color. He stared at her, not as a rancher inspecting new property, but as a man seeing a specter rise from the grave. His jaw tightened, and a muscle feathered along its edge. He breathed the word a raw, disbelieving whisper. It was not a greeting. It was an accusation. Clara flinched. Confusion warred with her fear. Had they met, she searched her memory, sifting through the faces of St. Louis, but this man's hard, weather-beaten face was entirely alien to her. She had never seen him before in her life, but as Silas Blackwood stared at her, at the tangle of honey-blonde hair escaping her bonnet, at the faint, silvery scar just above her left eyebrow that she'd had since childhood, it was clear he knew her. He knew her from somewhere deep and dark, a place of secrets and shadows. And whatever memory he held of her, it was not a pleasant one. It was a memory that looked like a nightmare. Silas Blackwood felt the ground shift beneath his boots. The world he had so meticulously constructed over the last 5 years, this ranch, this name, this life, crumbled into dust in the space of a single heartbeat. He had paid Jedediah Kane's exorbitant price to settle a debt, a cold business transaction to acquire a wife who could manage his home and provide a semblance of respectability. He had been expecting a plain, desperate woman from back east. He had been prepared for tears, for fear, for resentment. He was not prepared for her. The name on the telegram had been Clara May Thompson, a common enough name. It had meant nothing to him. But the face was a brand on his soul. The honey-blonde hair, the cornflower blue eyes that were now wide with fright, and the scar. God, the scar! A tiny crescent-shaped silver line just above her left brow. He had given her that scar. His hand, shaking with terror and adrenaline, had slipped. Her name wasn't Clara May Thompson, not the name he knew her by. He knew her as Lily, just Lily. And the last time he had seen her, she was lying in a pool of blood and shattered glass on the floor of a grimy room above a saloon in St. Denis. her eyes vacant, her life seemingly extinguished by the very man he'd just done business with. Jedediah Kane. Silas had run. He had fled that night, believing he was leaving 2 corpses behind, Lily and the man he had been. He'd changed his name from Samuel Jones to Silas Blackwood, burned his old life to the ground, and rode west until the past was nothing but a dull ache in his bones. He'd used the money he'd stolen from Kane to buy this land, to build this fortress of solitude and sweat, hoping the sheer toil would be enough to scrub the memory of her face from his mind. And now here she was, on his doorstep, delivered to him by the very devil he had escaped. A cold dread, colder than any Arizona winter night, washed over him. This was not a coincidence. Kane was playing a game, a twisted, sadistic game, and Silas was a pawn. Had Kane known who he was sending, or was this just the cruelest twist of fate imaginable? He looked into her eyes and saw no recognition. Nothing. To her he was a stranger. She didn't remember him. The thought should have been a relief, but it felt like a fresh wound. "Get inside," he said, his voice harsher than he intended. The whisper of her old name, Lily, died on his lips. Clara flinched at his tone and scurried past him into the house. The interior was masculine and sparsely furnished, yet everything was of quality, heavy oak furniture, Navajo rugs on the polished wooden floors, a massive stone fireplace that dominated the main living space. It was the home of a man of means, but it lacked any touch of warmth or comfort. It felt like a barracks, not a home. An older woman with a severe pinched face and hair pulled back in a tight bun emerged from a hallway. Her name was Mrs. Gable, his housekeeper, a woman whose piety was matched only by her disapproval of nearly everything. "This is Miss Thompson." Silas stated, his voice flat. "She will be staying here. Show her to the east guest room." Mrs. Gable's thin eyebrows shot up. "The guest room, Mr. Blackwood, I was under the impression. That is, the master bedroom has been prepared." Silas's jaw clenched. The implication was clear. This woman was supposed to be his wife, to share his bed. The thought of her lying next to him, with no memory of who he was or what he'd failed to do, was a profanity. "The guest room will suffice," he snapped. "See to it." He turned and strode into his study, a room lined with books he never read, and maps of land he'd already conquered. He poured a generous measure of whiskey into a glass, his hand unsteady. The amber liquid did little to quell the storm raging inside him. The flashback hit him with the force of a physical blow. The gas lamps of St. Denis cast a greasy yellow light on the muddy streets. He was Samuel Jones then, just Sam, a young man with fast hands and a foolish heart, working as a faro dealer in Jedediah Kane's opulent rotten saloon. Kane was a predator who wore tailored suits and a diamond stickpin. He owned everything and everyone in his part of the city, including the girls who worked upstairs. And he owned Lily. She was new, barely 17, with an innocence that had no place in that den of vipers. Sam had fallen for her instantly. He would sneak her food from the kitchen share stories of a life out west he'd dreamed of, and promise to get her away from Kane. It was a boy's foolish promise. The night it all went wrong, Kane had been in a rage. He'd lost a fortune in a high-stakes poker game and had taken his fury out on Lily. Sam heard her screams from downstairs. He did something he'd never done before. He grabbed the stashed pistol from under his dealer's box and ran upstairs. He burst into the room to find Kane standing over her, his belt in his hand. Lily was on the floor, her dress torn, her face bruised. When she saw Sam, she tried to scramble toward him. Kane backhanded her, sending her crashing into a small side table. A glass lantern fell shattering, and a shard of glass sliced across her brow. That's when Sam's carefully constructed world of dreams exploded. He fired the pistol. The shot went wide, hitting a mirror. Cain, enraged, lunged at him. The fight was brutal and short. Sam was no brawler. Cain beat him senseless, and as Sam's vision faded to black, the last thing he saw was Cain standing over Lily's still silent form. He'd woken up hours later in an alley, thrown out with the trash, his pockets empty. Believing them both dead, Cain having killed Lily and him having failed to save her, he'd fled the city with nothing but the clothes on his back and a soul scarred by guilt. Silas drained his glass and poured another. He had built this ranch on a foundation of lies and blood money. He had become a hard man, a respected man, a man whose name carried weight in the territory. But it was all a facade. Underneath, he was still Samuel Jones, the coward who had run. And now Lily Clara was here, oblivious, vulnerable, delivered into his hands. He couldn't send her away. Where would she go? Back to her father, who would only sell her again. Back into the world where a man like Cain could find her. Keeping her here was the only way to protect her. It was a penance, a chance to do what he had failed to do all those years ago. But how could he live under the same roof with the ghost of his greatest failure? How could he look at her every day, see the scar he'd inadvertently caused and not be consumed by the past? He was her husband, in name her protector, in secret, and in his own mind, her betrayer. The arrangement was a lie, wrapped in a transaction, and Silas knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that the lies were only just beginning. The dust of the past had not settled. It had followed her all the way to Redemption Gulch, and a storm was coming. The days on the Blackwood Ranch bled into one another, each marked by the rising sun and the ceaseless dry wind. For Clara, life settled into a strange and unsettling routine. She was a bride without a husband, a mistress of a house who held no authority. Silas Blackwood was a phantom in his own home. He rose before dawn and returned long after dusk, his face grimed with the dust of the range, his eyes avoiding hers, as if her gaze were a physical blow. They ate their meals in a cavernous dining room, separated by a long oak table, and a silence so profound it was almost a sound in itself. He had given her one terse command the morning after her arrival. "Mrs. Gable runs the house. Do not interfere. Your presence is all that is required." The words stung, branding her as little more than a piece of furniture, an object purchased to fill a space. The other ranch hands watched her with a mixture of suspicion and pity. They were loyal to Blackwood, a man they respected for his toughness and his fairness, and they didn't know what to make of this pale, quiet woman who shared his name, but not his life. Whispers followed her like her own shadow. They called her the Ghost Bride. Mrs. Gable was the most formidable presence. The housekeeper saw Clara not as the lady of the house, but as an interloper, a disruption to her meticulously ordered world. She assigned Clara meaningless, demeaning tasks, polishing silver that was already gleaming, mending linens that had no tears, shelling peas until her fingers were sore. Every interaction was laced with passive aggression and cold disapproval. "Mr. Blackwood is a man of simple needs," Miss the older woman said one afternoon, her voice as crisp as starched linen. "He does not care for frivolity or complications." The implication was clear. Clara was a complication. Clara found her only solace in the vast, untamed landscape that surrounded the ranch house. She began taking long walks, venturing further each day. She learned the names of the desert plants from a tattered botany book she found in the study. The prickly pear, the ocotillo, the defiant, bright blossoms, of the claret cup cactus. The land was harsh, but it was honest. It did not pretend to be something it wasn't, unlike the man she was supposed to call her husband. One sweltering afternoon, she wandered toward the corrals where a group of cowboys were breaking a wild-spirited mustang. The horse, a magnificent creature of pure muscle and fury, bucked and kicked against the rope, fighting for its freedom. Clara watched, mesmerized by its untamed spirit. Jesse, the foreman who had fetched her from town, noticed her standing by the fence. He ambled over, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of a leather glove. "Quite a fighter, that one," he said, his tone surprisingly gentle. "Boss calls him Diablo. Seems fitting." "Does he have to be broken?" Clara asked softly. "He seems so proud." Jesse's weathered face softened with a hint of a smile. "Everything out here has to be tamed to be useful, miss. Horses land. Even people sometimes." He glanced toward the house, then back at her. "The boss, he ain't a bad man. He's just got a lot of fences built up inside him. High ones." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a neighboring rancher, a man named Sterling Hayes. Hayes was the opposite of Silas Blackwood in every way. Where Silas was dark and brooding, Hayes was fair-haired, florid, and effusively friendly. He owned the adjacent property, the Circle H, and was known for his prize-winning bulls and his gossiping nature. Well, Jesse, and this must be the mysterious Mrs. Blackwood. Hayes boomed, dismounting from his horse with a flourish. He swept his hat off, revealing a balding head, and gave Clara a smile that was a little too wide, a little too familiar. "Sterling Hayes at your service, ma'am. It is an absolute pleasure. Silas has been keeping you hidden away. We were all beginning to think you were a myth." Clara felt a blush creep up her neck. "A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Hayes." "Sterling, please," he insisted. "So tell me, how are you finding our humble corner of the world? Quite a change from St. Louis, I imagine. Your father, a Mr. Thompson. I believe I have some associates in the shipping trade back there." "Can't say I've heard the name." His friendly questions felt like an interrogation. She felt Silas's presence before she saw him. He moved with a quiet, predatory grace, and a sudden chill fell over the conversation. "Hayes," Silas said. His voice was flat, carrying a clear warning. "What do you want?" Hayes's smile didn't falter, but a flicker of caution entered his eyes. "Just being neighborly, Silas. Welcoming your lovely bride to the territory. We were just talking about her family back in St. Louis." Silas moved to stand slightly in front of Clara, a subtle but unmistakable gesture of possession and protection. "Her family is no concern of yours. State your business." "Business it is," Hayes said, his tone shifting. "There's been more rustling over by the northern range near Skeleton Canyon. Lost another 10 head last night. The brand was altered. It's clean work. Too clean for common thieves. I was thinking we should pool some men, ride out a posse." Silas's gaze remained fixed on Hayes, cold and unyielding. "I handle my own affairs, Hayes. You handle yours. Always the lone wolf, eh?" Blackwood Hayes chuckled, though it held no humor. He tipped his hat to Clara. "A pleasure, ma'am. I do hope we'll see more of you." With that, he mounted his horse and rode off. Clara watched him go, a sense of unease settling over her. She turned to Silas. "Thank you," she said quietly. He didn't look at her. He just stared out at the distant mesas, his jaw tight. "Stay away from him. Hayes trades in gossip like it's currency, and stay away from the corrals. This is no place for you." He turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the dust. The encounter had unsettled her, but it had also revealed something. Silas's coldness was a shield, his silence was a fortress. But when Sterling Hayes had started asking questions about her past, about her father, she had seen a flash of something else, in Silas's eyes. It wasn't warmth, not kindness. It was a raw, primal fear. The lone wolf of the Blackwood Ranch was afraid of something, and somehow she was at the very heart of that fear. The heat of the Arizona summer intensified, baking the land until it cracked. Tensions on the ranch simmered just beneath the surface, mirroring the oppressive weather. Clara felt as though she were living in a house, holding its breath. She continued her walks, her only escape, finding a strange comfort in the predictability of the desert's harsh rhythms. One afternoon, seeking refuge from the blistering sun, she ventured into one of the older, less used barns at the edge of the property. The air inside was thick with the scent of old hay leather and dust motes dancing in the shafts of light slanting through the boards. In a dark, forgotten corner, she found a collection of old trunks. Most were filled with moth-eaten blankets and rusted tools. But one, a small leather-bound coffer, was different. It was unlocked. Hesitantly, Clara lifted the lid. Inside, nestled amongst some old papers, was a small, crudely carved wooden bird. She picked it up. The carving was simple, almost childlike, but it was imbued with a sense of care. As her fingers traced the smooth, worn wood, a disorienting wave of dizziness washed over her. An image flashed in her mind, sharp and painfully vivid. A boy's face, younger than her own, with kind, earnest eyes. He was sitting across from her, a small, whittling knife in his hand, shavings of wood falling onto his lap. He was smiling, and he was saying a name. "For you, Lily. So you can fly away." Lily, the name echoed in the silent barn, a name that felt both foreign and intimately familiar. Clara stumbled back, dropping the wooden bird. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Who was Lily? Who was that boy? The memory was a ghost, a fragment of a life she couldn't place. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to grasp the fleeting image, but it dissolved like smoke, leaving behind only a profound sense of loss and a throbbing headache just behind her eyes. Shaken, she left the barn, the name Lily, a burning question on her lips. She had to ask Silas. He had looked at her with such strange recognition that first day. He knew something. He had to. She found him in his study. The door was ajar, and she could see him standing by the window, staring out at the unforgiving landscape, a glass of whiskey in his hand. For a moment, she saw not the formidable rancher, but a man burdened by a weight she couldn't comprehend. His shoulders were slumped, his posture one of utter exhaustion. She knocked softly on the doorframe. "Mr. Blackwood." He turned his face, instantly hardening into its familiar, unreadable mask. "What is it?" Clara held out the small wooden bird. "I found this. In the old barn." Silas's eyes fixed on the carving, and all the colour drained from his face. He looked as if she had struck him. He took a half-step forward, his gaze locked on the object in her palm, his knuckles white around his glass. "Where did you get that?" he demanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl. In a trunk, she stammered, intimidated by his violent reaction. It made me remember something. A name. Lily." The glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the wooden floor. Whiskey and shards of glass spread like a stain. Neither of them moved. The air crackled with a tension so thick Clara could barely breathe. "Who is Lily?" She pressed her voice, trembling but determined. "When you saw me at the door, you knew me. You didn't see Clara Thompson. You saw someone else. You saw her? Who is she? Who am I to you?" Silas stared at her. His blue eyes, a maelstrom of emotions she couldn't decipher, pain, fury, and a desperate, hunted fear. He looked from her face to the scar above her eye, and a look of such profound agony crossed his features that she almost took a step back. "You don't want to know," he said, his voice ragged. "Some doors are best left unopened. Some ghosts are best left buried. I'm not a ghost, she cried, frustration, and a strange sense of grief welling up inside her. I'm a person, and you look at me like I'm a sin you committed. My father sold me to you to pay a debt. But that's not the whole story, is it? There's more. I have a right to know what it is. He strode toward her, stopping just inches away. He was so close, she could feel the heat radiating from him, could smell the whiskey on his breath. He was terrifying, and yet for the first time, she wasn't just afraid. She was angry. A right, he scoffed, his voice, dripping with a bitterness that seemed ancient. You have a roof over your head. You have food in your belly. You are safe. That is more than you had. That is all you need to know. He reached out and snatched the wooden bird from her hand, his fingers brushing hers. The brief contact sent a jolt through her, another flash of a memory too quick to catch. It was a memory of warmth of a hand held in hers, of safety. It was so at odds with the cold, hard man standing before her that it made her head spin. Forget the bird, he commanded, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Forget the name, and do not ever go through my things again. Your life here depends on your obedience. Do you understand me? He was pushing her away, building his walls higher and stronger. But he had made a mistake. By reacting so violently, he had confirmed her suspicions. He was hiding a monumental secret, and that secret was inextricably tied to her. She was not just Clara May Thompson, the bartered bride. She was someone else, too. She was Lily. And whatever had happened to Lily was the reason for the haunted look in Silas Blackwood's eyes. She didn't answer him. She simply met his icy gaze with a newfound fire in her own. The fear was still there, but now it was forged with resolve. He could threaten her. He could ignore her. He could lock her in this gilded cage, but she would not rest until she unearthed the truth. She would find out who Lily was, and she would discover what happened to her. She had to. She finally understood that her future depended on reclaiming a past she couldn't even remember. The fragile truce between Clara and Silas shattered. The house, once merely silent, was now thick with a palpable unspoken animosity. Clara's every glance was a question. Silas's every word was a command to retreat. He began taking his meals in his study, avoiding her completely. The ranch became her prison, and the man who held the key was also its most tormented inmate. Clara's search for answers became more desperate. She started to pay closer attention to the conversations of the ranch hands, hoping for a stray clue. She learned that Silas Blackwood had arrived in the territory 5 years ago, a man with no past and a satchel full of cash. He bought the land from a family bankrupted by drought, and through relentless work, built it into the most prosperous ranch in the region. He was known as a hard but fair boss, a man who kept to himself and never spoke of where he came from. He was a mystery, and the more she learned, the less she knew. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. One evening, Jessie the foreman found her sitting on the veranda, watching the sky bleed into shades of orange and purple. He approached her hesitantly, hat in his hands. "Ma'am," he began, his voice low. "It ain't my place. But I see the way the boss looks at you, and I see the way you look at him. Like two people staring at each other across a canyon. I knew him, you see, before he was Silas Blackwood." Clara's head snapped up, her heart leaping. "You knew him?" Jessie nodded, his gaze distant. "Met him on a cattle drive out of Texas. He was just a kid then. Called himself Sam Jones. Quiet fella, but a good hand. Something was chasing him, though. Something bad. He never talked about it, but you could see it in his eyes. The same look he has now when he watches you. He paused, kicking at a loose floorboard with the toe of his boot. About a week ago, a rider came through from Santa Fe. He was asking questions in town about a man named Sam Jones and about a girl who disappeared from St. Denis 5 years back, a girl named Lily. The world tilted on its axis. What did this rider look like? Clara whispered, a cold premonition creeping up her spine. Dressed fancy, Jessie said, like a gambler. Had a silver stick pin in his tie, shaped like a rattlesnake. Rode a fine, black stallion. Didn't give a name, but folk said he had the eyes of the devil himself. The description, though vague, sent a tremor of pure terror through Clara. She didn't know why. It was a primal fear, a cellular memory of a danger she could not name. The devil arrived 2 days later. He rode into the Blackwood Ranch, not like a visitor, but like a king reclaiming his domain. He was just as Jessie described, impeccably dressed in a black suit, despite the heat, with a silver rattlesnake pin glinting on his cravat. His face was handsome in a cruel, sharp-featured way, and his eyes were cold and black. He dismounted his stallion with an easy grace and strode toward the house, his polished boots leaving marks in the dust. Clara was arranging wildflowers in a vase in the main room when she saw him through the window. A wave of nausea and a blinding, searing pain shot through her head. The smell of cheap perfume and stale cigar smoke. A man's voice, smooth as silk but laced with menace. "You belong to me, Lily. You'll never leave." The flash of a silver rattlesnake pin. Pain sharp and blinding as her head hit the floor. The vase slipped from her numb fingers and crashed to the ground. Water and flowers spread across the floorboards. She stumbled back, gasping for air, the fragmented memory leaving her dizzy and terrified. At that moment, Silas burst in from his study, a rifle in his hands. He must have seen the rider approach. He froze when he saw the man step onto the veranda, his face a mask of disbelief and pure, unadulterated hatred. The man on the veranda smiled, a slow, predatory curving of his lips. "Sammy boy," he drawled, his voice a venomous purr that slithered into the room. My, you've done well for yourself. A big house, all this land. It's amazing what a man can build with stolen money." Cain Silas snarled. The name hung in the air like a death sentence. Jedediah Cain's eyes slid past Silas and landed on Clara. His smile widened. "And look what we have here. I should have known. When her father couldn't pay his debts, he mentioned he had a daughter out west. I thought what a charming coincidence. I'll send her to this Silas Blackwood and see what happens. But I never dreamed I'd find you both. It's like finding my 2 favorite lost pets in the same dirty alley." He took a step into the house, his gaze devouring Clara. "Hello, Lily. Did you miss me?" Clara shrank back, her mind reeling. The name, the face. It was all crashing down on her, a waterfall of broken, terrifying memories. This was the man from her nightmares, the man who had owned her, hurt her. "Her name is Clara Silas," said, his voice lethally low as he leveled the rifle at Cain's chest. "And you'll get off my land before I put you in it." Cain laughed, a chilling, humorless sound. "Oh, Sammy, always so dramatic. You shot at me once before. Remember, you missed. And then you ran, leaving your little songbird to die. But she's a resilient creature, isn't she? A bit damaged, perhaps. I heard she lost her memory after her accident. How convenient. It allows a man to reinvent himself, doesn't it?" He took another step, his eyes fixed on Clara. "I'm here to collect what's mine. I paid her father's debt, which means I own her contract. I own her, and I've come to take her home." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Her father hadn't sold her to Silas. He had sold her back to the monster she had escaped. Cain had sent her here as a cat sends a mouse to a trap a twisted game to smoke out the man who had stolen from him and disappeared. And Silas Sam had bought her, never knowing he was springing that very trap. "You're not taking her anywhere," Silas said, his knuckles white on the rifle stock. "You're in no position to bargain," Cain said coolly. He gestured outside. 3 armed men who had ridden in behind him were now dismounted, their rifles held at the ready. They had Silas's ranch hands covered. "You see, I've come prepared. You can die here a hero and I'll take her anyway. Or you can give me the money you stole from my safe that night, with interest, and give me the girl, and I'll let you live on this pathetic patch of dirt you call an empire." The devil of St. Denis had come to Arizona. He had laid his trap perfectly, and now Silas and Clara were caught in its teeth. There was no running this time. The past had not just caught up to them, it was holding a gun to their heads. The world seemed to shrink to the confines of the main room. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall was a slow, deliberate countdown to damnation. Outside, the sun began its descent, painting the sky in bloody streaks of orange and red. It was the hour of reckoning. The money, Sam Cain, repeated his voice, silky smooth. And the girl. "It's a simple transaction." Silas's rifle remained steady, aimed at Cain's heart, but they both knew it was a bluff. His men were outside, outgunned. Jesse and the others were good cowboys, not hardened killers like the men Cain employed. A single shot from Silas would unleash a massacre. Clara's mind, once a fog, was now a maelstrom of returning memories. She saw it all, Cain's cruelty, his possessiveness, the gilded cage of her room above the saloon. And she remembered Sam, the quiet, gentle card dealer with dreams in his eyes, the boy who had given her a small wooden bird and promised her the sky, the boy who had tried to save her. He hadn't abandoned her. He had fought for her. And he had lost. She looked at Silas, truly seeing him for the first time. The hard lines of his face were the result of 5 years of guilt. The coldness in his eyes was a shield against the memory of his failure. He wasn't Silas Blackwood, the formidable rancher. He was Sam Jones, the boy who never stopped running from that night. "Don't do it, Sam," she whispered, her voice finding a strength she didn't know it possessed. Cain chuckled. "Listen to her. Still trying to protect you. Such a loyal little thing." He turned his full attention to her. "It's time to go, Lily. We have a lot of lost time to make up for." He reached for her. As his fingers brushed her arm, the final wall in her mind crumbled. The memory of the fight came back in its full bloody horror, the shattering glass, the gunshot Cain's brutal assault on Sam. But she remembered something else too. After Sam had been knocked unconscious, and after she had been thrown against the table, Cain had turned his back on her, believing her to be insensible. But she wasn't. With the last of her strength, she had crawled, grabbed the heavy overturned inkwell from the floor, and brought it down on the back of his head. He had collapsed, stunned, giving her just enough time to stumble out the back door and into the night where she had collapsed in an alley, her mind fracturing from the trauma. That was where a kindly doctor had found her a girl with no memory and a bleeding head wound. He had given her a new name, Clara, to match her blank slate of a mind. She hadn't been a victim waiting to be saved. She had fought back. That knowledge ignited a fire in her soul. As Cain's hand closed around her arm, she reacted not with fear, but with fury. She wrenched her arm free and spat in his face. "My name is Clara," she hissed, "and I will die before I go anywhere with you." Cain's handsome face contorted into a mask of rage. He backhanded her the force of the blow, sending her staggering against the long dining table. The sound echoed in the room like a gunshot. and it broke something in Sam. He saw it happen all over again, Cain striking her falling. The same room, the same devil, the same girl. 5 years of running, 5 years of self-loathing, 5 years of building a fortress. It all burned away in an instant, leaving only the raw primal need that had driven him up those stairs in St. Denis. Protect her. But this time he wasn't a frightened boy with a stolen pistol. He was a man forged in the crucible of the West. He knew this land, this house, this fight. Now Cain Sam said, his voice terrifyingly calm. He lowered the rifle slightly. You've made your choice. In that split second of confusion, Sam acted. He lunged, not at Cain, but to the side toward the massive stone fireplace. With one powerful heave, he kicked the heavy iron grate, sending a shower of hot coals and ash billowing into the room. The air filled with thick, choking smoke. Cain swore, stumbling back, his eyes watering. His men outside, momentarily blinded and confused by the sudden chaos, hesitated. It was all the time Sam needed. Clara, the study. Lock the door, he yelled. He dove behind the overturned oak table, the rifle coming up to his shoulder, just as one of Cain's men appeared in the doorway. Sam fired. The shot was clean, decisive. The man fell back onto the porch. Clara, her mind clear and sharp with adrenaline, didn't hesitate. She scrambled into the study and threw the heavy bolt on the door. Gunshots erupted from outside, splintering the wooden walls of the house. Sam returned fire, using the heavy furniture as cover, his movements economical and deadly. He wasn't just a rancher. He was a survivor. Cain, recovering from the smoke, drew a silver-plated revolver from his coat. You can't hide forever, Sam, he roared, firing a shot into the table that sent splinters flying past Sam's head. From the study, Clara frantically looked for a way to help. Her eyes fell on the heavy leather-bound ledgers on Sam's desk, the records of his ranch, his new life. Beneath them was a heavy locked box. Her gaze darted to the letter opener on the desk. She jammed it into the lock, twisting with all her might. The lock popped open. Inside was a Colt peacemaker and a box of cartridges. The gun Sam had hidden from his past. She knew how to use it. Her father, in one of his few moments of responsible parenting, had taught her to shoot, to protect herself on the rougher side of St. Louis. Her hands shook as she loaded the weapon. Outside the study, the fight raged. Sam was holding his own, but he was pinned down. He could hear Cain shouting orders, trying to flank him. Suddenly, the window of the study, which faced the side of the house, shattered. One of Cain's men was trying to climb in. Clara didn't think. She raised the heavy pistol with both hands, aimed and fired. The recoil slammed her shoulder back, but the shot hit its mark. The man cried out and fell from the window. The shot from the study startled everyone. Cain paused, realizing he was now fighting a war on 2 fronts. That pause was his final mistake. Sam burst from behind the table, no longer defending but attacking. He fired his last shot from the rifle, forcing Cain to duck behind the doorframe. Sam discarded the empty rifle and drew a revolver from his hip, a weapon he always carried on the ranch. He charged forward, a primal roar tearing from his throat. He and Cain met on the veranda in a brutal explosion of violence. It wasn't a gunfight anymore, it was a brawl. They crashed against the railings, fists flying. Cain was wiry and fast, but Sam was fueled by 5 years of suppressed rage and guilt. He was fighting for more than his life. He was fighting for his soul. He was fighting for Lily. He slammed Cain against a porch post, the wood groaning in protest. Cain, gasping, spat a mouthful of blood and laughed, a gurgling, insane sound. You think this changes anything? She'll always be my property, tainted goods. She was never yours, Sam grunted, landing a punishing blow to Cain's ribs. He disarmed Cain, sending the silver revolver skittering across the porch. He pinned him to the floor, his hands closing around Kane's throat. For a moment, the desperate boy from St. Denis was back ready to kill. But as he looked down at the sputtering, hateful face of his tormentor, he saw Clara standing in the doorway of the house, the pistol still clutched in her hands, her face streaked with soot and tears. This wasn't about revenge. It was about redemption. With a final guttural yell, Sam hauled Kane to his feet and threw him off the veranda. Kane landed hard in the dust. Jesse and the other ranch hands, having dealt with the last of Kane's men, now had their guns trained on him. It was over. The sun had set and the reckoning was done. The silence that descended upon the Blackwood Ranch was more profound than any that had come before. It was a silence born of shock and exhaustion, filled with the smell of gunpowder and scorched wood. Jedediah Kane and his surviving gunmen were bound and under guard in the bunkhouse, awaiting the arrival of the marshal from Redemption Gulch, whom Jesse had ridden off to fetch. Inside the ravaged main room, Sam, he was no longer Silas in his own mind, stood amidst the wreckage of his home and his life. The floor was littered with shattered glass, splintered wood, and the cooling embers from the fireplace. It was a perfect reflection of his soul, a ruin built on a foundation of secrets now blown open for the world to see. Clara stood near the doorway, the heavy pistol still hanging from her hand, forgotten. Her eyes, wide and luminous in the twilight, were fixed on him. They held no fear, no judgment, only a deep, resonant sorrow that mirrored his own. Sam, she said the name, a soft caress in the still air. It was the first time she had called him that, and it felt like both a absolution and a fresh wound. He couldn't meet her gaze. He stared at his hands, which were bruised and bloodied from the fight. These were the hands that had failed her 5 years ago, and the hands that had just saved her. He didn't know which man he was anymore. "I should have told you," he said, his voice raw, "the moment you stepped on that porch. I should have told you everything." "You were afraid," she said. It wasn't an accusation, but a simple statement of fact. "So was I." She finally let the pistol clatter to the floor and walked toward him, her steps sure and steady through the debris. She stopped in front of him and gently, tentatively reached out to touch his face. Her fingers traced the line of his jaw, then brushed against a cut on his cheek. He flinched not from pain, but from the intimacy of the touch. It was a tenderness he didn't feel he deserved. The boy who carved me a bird so I could fly away. "He's still in there, isn't he?" she asked softly. A wave of emotion so powerful it threatened to bring him to his knees washed over him. He closed his eyes. "He ran, Clara. He left you there. He tried to save me," she corrected him, her voice firm. "He fought for me. And you just did it again. You didn't run this time." He finally found the courage to look at her, to truly see the woman she had become. She was not the fragile Lily he remembered, nor the timid Clara who had arrived on his doorstep. She was a survivor, forged in her own fire with a strength that humbled him. The scar above her eye was not a mark of his failure anymore. It was a testament to her resilience. "Kane sent you here on purpose," he said, the ugly truth needing to be spoken. "He used you as bait, and I walked right into it. I bought you, like you were property. My father sold me," she said, her eyes welling with tears but her voice steady. "Kane tried to claim me. You set me free. Twice. The weight of the last 5 years began to lift, not vanishing but shifting into something he might one day be able to carry. The lies were gone. The secrets were out. All that was left was the raw, painful, and undeniable truth of their shared past. What happens now? He asked the question, hanging between them, more daunting than any gunman. Their marriage was a sham, a business contract predicated on a lie. They were two strangers bound by a trauma that had defined both their lives. Clara looked around the ruined room at the ashes and the wreckage. "We clean it up," she said, with a quiet simplicity that cut through all the complexity. "We sweep up the glass and mend what's broken. And we start again." She took his bloodied hand in hers, her small fingers lacing through his. It felt like an anchor in a storm-tossed sea. "My name is Clara," she said, meeting his gaze with a fierce, beautiful clarity. "And your name is Sam. We've both been living as ghosts. I think it's time we learned how to live as people again. Together, if you'll have me." It was not a declaration of love, not a promise of a fairy tale. It was something more real, more profound. It was a choice to face the dawn after the longest, darkest night. A choice to build a new life, not on the lies of Silas Blackwood, but on the shared scars of Clara and Sam. For the first time in 5 years, Sam Jones felt a flicker of something he had long thought buried forever hope. He squeezed her hand, a silent promise passing between them. The fire had burned his house down, but in the ashes they had found each other. And in the vast, unforgiving desert under a canopy of stars, they would finally begin to build a home. The story of Clara and Sam is a testament to the fact that the past is never truly buried. It's a ghost that walks beside us, waiting for its moment to demand a reckoning. They were two broken souls, sold and bought, bound, by a secret they didn't even know they shared. Their journey through the dust and danger of the Old West wasn't just about survival. It was about reclaiming their identities and finding redemption in the ashes of their former lives. Can a future truly be built on such a violent and painful foundation? We believe it can. If their story of resilience, courage, and the fight for a second chance resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who loves a story where the human spirit refuses to be broken. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more tales of history, drama, and the untamed heart. Click that notification bell so you never miss a new story from the wild heart of the past.